In April 2009, a blood-stained ruby collar was found in a dumpster 3 miles from one of Los Angeles' most exclusive Bel Air mansions. The discovery would unravel a decades-long pattern of vanishing young women, all connected to real estate mogul Rajesh Kumar, whose empire was built not just on property, but on the bodies of those who dared to leave him. For 25-year-old aspiring actress Ashley Parker, her dream of Hollywood stardom would become a nightmare of surveillance, control, and ultimately, murder. But to understand how a small-town girl from Milwaukee became the final victim of La's most dangerous sugar daddy, we need to go back to where it all began. Ashley Parker stood before her bathroom mirror in her cramped Studio City apartment, rehearsing lines for an audition she knew would likely end like all the others. Born in 1983 to middle-class parents in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Ashley had always dreamed bigger than her surroundings. Her mother Sandra, a high school guidance counselor, and father Mark, a local bank manager, had watched their youngest daughter's Hollywood ambitions grow with a mixture of support and concern. They'd seen her perform in every school play, helped her make audition tapes, and reluctantly supported her decision to move to Los Angeles after graduating from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a degree in theater arts. The move to Los Angeles in early 2008 had seemed like the beginning of Ashley's dream. Reality, however, proved far harsher than her carefully crafted vision. The city that promised stardom instead delivered a series of crushing disappointments. Her savings, meticulously built over 4 years of part-time jobs during college, evaporated within months. The acting classes she'd enrolled in at a prestigious Hollywood academy, $3,000 per semester, had yielded nothing but mounting credit card debt and a growing sense of desperation. By day, Ashley worked double shifts at the Grove, a popular shopping center, juggling tables at 2 different restaurants to make ends meet. By night, she attended auditions, each rejection chipping away at her once boundless confidence. Her tiny studio apartment, with its peeling wallpaper and temperamental air conditioning, cost nearly 2/3 of her monthly income. The rest disappeared into headshots, acting workshops, and the minimum payments on her rapidly accumulating debt. The transformation in Ashley's appearance over her first year in Los Angeles told its own story. The fresh-faced Midwestern girl with naturally blonde hair and bright blue eyes had given way to a more polished, harder version of herself. She'd learned to dress the part of an aspiring actress, spending money she didn't have on clothes that projected success she hadn't achieved. Her natural charm, once genuine and unforced, had taken on an edge of calculation, a necessity for survival in a city that traded in dreams but dealt in harsh realities. It was during one of her evening shifts at La Maison, an upscale French restaurant at the Grove, that Ashley first encountered Rajesh Kumar. The 63-year-old real estate tycoon commanded attention the moment he entered the restaurant, his tailored suit and authoritative presence drawing all eyes. Ashley noticed how the maître d' practically bowed in his presence, how other servers subtly competed to attend his table. She learned later that he owned not just La Maison but half the buildings in that section of the Grove. Rajesh had immigrated to the United States in the early 1960s with an engineering degree and ambition that bordered on ruthlessness. Over 4 decades, he had built Kumar Properties into one of Los Angeles' most successful real estate development companies. His recent divorce from his wife of 30 years had been fodder for local business newspapers, the settlement terms kept carefully private through expensive lawyers and sealed court documents. That first evening, Ashley found herself assigned to Rajesh's table, where he was dining alone. She noticed immediately how his dark eyes followed her movements, calculating and intense. His questions about her background, delivered in perfectly accented English, seemed genuinely interested rather than merely polite. When he left a $1,000 tip on a $300 meal, Ashley felt a flutter of excitement mixed with unease. Rajesh began appearing regularly at La Maison, always requesting Ashley's section. His attention was subtle at first, questions about her acting ambitions, sympathetic comments about the challenges of making it in Hollywood. He mentioned connections in the entertainment industry with the casual air of someone accustomed to wielding influence. Each interaction was carefully choreographed, each gesture designed to create an air of benevolent authority. The red flags were there from the beginning, though Ashley, desperate and increasingly disillusioned with her Hollywood dreams, chose to ignore them. The way Rajesh's pleasant demeanor would crack slightly when she was delayed in reaching his table. How his questions about her schedule became more probing, his knowledge of her movements more detailed than she had shared. The possessive glance he gave male customers who smiled at her too long. When he finally asked her to dinner, Ashley hesitated. He was older than her father, his carefully maintained appearance unable to completely disguise the age gap. But she thought of her maxed-out credit cards, the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter, the increasingly urgent calls from debt collectors. She thought of the casting directors who hadn't even looked up from their phones during her auditions, the acting coaches who took her money while offering empty platitudes about persistence. "I would be honored," she had said, matching his formal tone, while something in her gut whispered a warning she chose not to hear. That evening marked the beginning of what Ashley would later recognize as a carefully executed seduction, not of her heart, but of her circumstances. Rajesh had recognized in her the perfect combination of ambition and desperation, of youth and naivety, of beauty and financial vulnerability. He had seen not just a beautiful young woman, but a possession to be acquired, a life to be controlled. Little did Ashley know, as she prepared for that first dinner date, selecting her most sophisticated dress and practicing her most charming smile, that she was taking the first steps down a path that would ultimately lead to her destruction. The man who would become her benefactor, her controller, and ultimately her murderer watched from his Bentley across the street as she left her apartment, his dark eyes glinting with satisfaction at the precision with which his plan was unfolding. The transformation of Ashley Parker's life began with a Cartier bracelet, delicately presented over dessert at Spargo during their third dinner together. Rajesh Kumar's dark eyes studied her face as she opened the distinctive red box, gauging her reaction to what would be the first of many golden chains disguised as gifts. It was February 2008, and the Los Angeles winter had painted the city in an unseasonable chill that made his warmth seem all the more appealing. "It's too much," Ashley had protested weakly, even as she let him clasp the bracelet around her wrist. The diamonds caught the candlelight, sparkling like the promises he wove with careful words. "Nonsense," Rajesh replied, his accent thickening slightly as it did when he was particularly pleased. "A beautiful woman should be adorned appropriately." His fingers lingered on her wrist a moment too long, possessive rather than affectionate. The bracelet was followed by a cascade of increasingly extravagant gifts. A Chanel handbag appeared after she mentioned admiring one in a magazine. When she complained about her unreliable car, a pearl-white BMW X3 materialized, complete with a red bow. Her protests grew weaker with each gift, her gratitude tinged with a growing understanding of the unspoken expectations that came with such generosity. By April, Rajesh had convinced Ashley to quit her waitressing jobs. "Focus on your acting," he had insisted, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll take care of your expenses." The monthly allowance he arranged was more than she had ever earned waiting tables, deposited punctually into a new bank account he had opened for her. Her credit card debt vanished, paid off by a wire transfer she pretended not to notice. Her small studio apartment was exchanged for a luxury condo in Beverly Hills, the lease in his name. The space was 3 times larger than her old place, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city. The closets came pre-filled with designer clothes in exactly her size. It felt like a fairy tale, but Ashley couldn't shake the sensation that she was being dressed like a doll in a particularly expensive dollhouse. Isabella Marcus, Ashley's closest friend from her waitressing days, was the first to notice the subtle changes. Over coffee one morning, she observed how Ashley checked her phone constantly, responding immediately to Rajesh's texts with detailed accounts of her whereabouts. "He just worries," Ashley explained, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You know how dangerous LA can be." "Worried or controlling?" Isabella had asked pointedly, noting how Ashley's once casual style had been replaced by sophisticated designer outfits that seemed better suited to a woman twice her age. The tracking began subtly. First, it was the insistence that she use his personal driver, Carlos, for all her appointments. For safety, Rajesh explained, though they both knew Carlos reported her every movement. Then came the gifts of the latest iPhone and Apple Watch, both already configured with location sharing enabled. When Ashley discovered the small tracking device in her purse one evening, she told herself it was just another sign of his devotion. Behind her growing discomfort, Ashley maintained her own agenda. She carefully noted every name Rajesh dropped at dinner parties, every industry connection he casually mentioned. She attended the charity galas and business functions on his arm, playing the role of the enchanting ingenue while networking with producers and directors. Her acting skills, if nothing else, were getting a thorough workout. But Rajesh's obsession grew more apparent with each passing week. He began showing up unannounced at her acting classes, watching from the back of the room with unblinking intensity. Her social media accounts, once full of casual posts and interactions with friends, were now carefully curated under his watchful eye. Any male comment or like would result in hours of questioning. May brought a particular incident that should have warned Ashley of the darkness to come. She had missed one of his calls while in an audition, emerging to find 27 missed calls and a scene that made her blood run cold. Rajesh had emptied her entire condo, stripped it bare except for a single chair in the middle of the living room. She found him sitting there, perfectly composed in one of his immaculate suits. "I thought something might have happened to you," he said quietly, his calm voice at odds with the violent display of power around them. "I was concerned." The furniture and her belongings were returned the next day, but the message was clear. Everything she had could disappear at his whim. In June, Ashley's mother called, worried about her daughter's increasingly infrequent communication. "You sound different," Sandra Parker said, maternal instinct picking up on something her daughter's carefully crafted responses couldn't hide. "Are you sure everything's all right?" "Everything's perfect, Mom," Ashley replied, watching her from across the room. "I've never been better." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. The summer brought more gifts, more control, more subtle threats wrapped in declarations of devotion. Rajesh began insisting on weekly dinners with his adult children, parading Ashley before them like a prize while they stared at her with barely concealed disdain. His daughter, only a few years older than Ashley, once cornered her in the bathroom of his Bel Air mansion. "You're not the first," she had said, her words carrying the weight of warning. "But you might be the last." His different now, more intense. Ashley had laughed it off, but the words haunted her. By August, Ashley's world had shrunk to the dimensions Rajesh allowed. Her friends had drifted away, put off by her new lifestyle and her increasingly erratic behavior. The acting classes and auditions became less frequent, though she clung to them as her last connection to her original dreams. Her phone buzzed constantly with his messages, each requiring an immediate response. The breaking point should have come during a dinner party at his home. Ashley had laughed too long at a joke told by one of his business associates, a harmless moment that earned her a shattered crystal glass in the kitchen afterward, Rajesh's controlled facade cracking to reveal something terrifying beneath. But she stayed, telling herself it was all part of her plan, that she just needed to hold on until the right connections materialized, until her career took off. The diamond necklace he clasped around her neck the next day felt heavier than usual, its weight a reminder of the golden cage she had willingly entered. As summer faded into fall, Ashley Parker looked into her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the polished, sophisticated woman who stared back. She touched the expensive jewelry that adorned her neck, wrists, and fingers, markers of ownership rather than affection. In the other room, her phone buzzed again, Rajesh's name lighting up the screen. She took a deep breath, composed her features into the smile he expected, and prepared to respond. The cage might be golden, but its bars were growing stronger by the day. The autumn of 2008 brought a chance encounter that would ultimately seal Ashley Parker's fate. While hurriedly leaving an audition, one of the few activities Rajesh still permitted without his driver present, she literally ran into Mark Stevens, a 28-year-old aspiring director. Coffee spilled, apologies exchanged, and for the first time in months, Ashley felt her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Mark's easy smile and genuine interest in her acting ambitions reminded Ashley of the woman she had been before Rajesh, before the designer clothes and carefully monitored schedule had become her prison. Their first secret meeting was innocent enough. Coffee at a small cafe in Los Feliz, far from Rajesh's usual haunts. Ashley told herself it was just networking, just another industry connection to cultivate. But the cafe meeting led to texts, which led to more clandestine meetings. Ashley discovered she could breathe again in Mark's presence, could laugh without calculating the appropriate volume or duration. She found herself sharing small acts of rebellion, removing her Apple Watch during their meetings, leaving her phone in the car, paying cash to avoid leaving a credit card trail that Rajesh would scrutinize. Meanwhile, Rajesh's control tightened like a noose. October brought a new gift, a complete home security system for her condo, ostensibly in response to a break-in 2 buildings away. Ashley watched in silent horror as the technicians installed cameras in every room except the bathroom, their lenses like unblinking eyes. For your protection, Rajesh had insisted, his hand tight around her waist. I couldn't bear if anything happened to you. The jewelry he gave her now came with explicit instructions about when and where to wear it. A diamond-encrusted Cartier watch replaced her Apple Watch, this one with a built-in GPS tracker that she couldn't remove without his knowledge. Her clothes were selected and laid out each morning by a personal stylist who reported directly to him. Even her groceries were delivered pre-selected, her diet monitored as carefully as her movements. One afternoon, while Rajesh was in a business meeting, Ashley received a mysterious text from an unknown number. Storage Unit 247, Public Storage on Sunset. Code is 1989. You need to see this. Her curiosity overrode her caution, and she made an excuse to her driver about a last-minute audition. The storage unit contained boxes of documents and photographs, evidence of Rajesh's previous relationships. Young women, all bearing a striking resemblance to Ashley, their stories documented in restraining orders, police reports, and hospital records. One photo showed a woman, her face bruised but defiant, holding up a newspaper from 2006. Another contained a diary, its pages filled with a desperate chronicle of escalating control and violence. Ashley's hands shook as she read through the documents. Names jumped out at her. Rebecca Martinez, disappeared in 2003, case still open. Zoe Mitchell, hospitalized in 2005 after a fall from her balcony. Catherine Wells, whose sudden move to London in 2007, had left all her belongings behind in a luxury apartment much like Ashley's. A noise outside the storage unit sent her rushing back to her carefully monitored life, but the knowledge weighed on her like lead. She began to notice other things, how Rajesh's business associates never seemed surprised by her presence, as if they had seen others in her role before. How his children's initial disdain had mellowed into something like pity. November brought a new level of surveillance. Rajesh began showing up at her acting classes unannounced, sitting in the back with his dark eyes fixed on her every move. His gifts became more pointed, a ruby and diamond collar that might as well have been a leash, its clasp requiring his key to remove. Her phone now required his fingerprint to access certain apps, her emails automatically forwarded to his account. Her secret meetings with Mark became both more dangerous and more essential to her sanity. They crafted elaborate plans to avoid detection. She would attend legitimate auditions but meet him immediately after, changing clothes in public restrooms to avoid the cameras that seemed to follow her everywhere. She memorized the blind spots in the city's surveillance network, the times when Rajesh's attention would be occupied by business dealings. But Rajesh's instincts, honed by years of controlling others, began to detect subtle changes in Ashley's behavior. Her smiles came a fraction too late. Her responses to his texts took a few seconds too long. He noticed how she lingered a few minutes more than necessary after auditions, how her cheeks sometimes carried a flush that couldn't be attributed to exercise or makeup. The first warning came in the form of a photo, left casually on her dining room table. Ashley and Mark leaving the cafe in Los Feliz. No note, no confrontation, just the image placed where she couldn't miss it. The message was clear. Nothing escaped his notice. The second warning was more direct. Mark's independent film project, which had been gaining traction with investors, suddenly lost all its funding. His apartment building, owned by a subsidiary of Kumar Properties, abruptly terminated his lease citing code violations. His car was vandalized, his tires slashed in broad daylight with no witnesses. Ashley tried to end things with Mark, her fear for his safety overwhelming her desperate need for human connection. But Mark, either braver or more foolish than she had realized, refused to let her go. We can fight him, he insisted during their last meeting, not understanding that the battle had been lost long before it began. December arrived with a bitter chill that seemed to seep into Ashley's bones. Her attempts at independence had been systematically stripped away. Her acting coach suddenly retired, replaced by one of Rajesh's choosing. Her few remaining friends received job offers in other cities, opportunities too good to refuse. Even her parents' weekly calls were now monitored, conducted on speakerphone in Rajesh's presence. The final evidence of her captivity came during a dinner party at Rajesh's Bel Air mansion. As she excused herself to use the bathroom, she overheard his voice drifting from his study. Yes, just like the others, he was saying to someone. But this one is special. She won't be leaving. The words sent ice through her veins, confirming what she had long suspected. She was just the latest in a series, but possibly the last. As December drew to a close, Ashley stood in her bathroom, the only place free of cameras, and stared at her reflection. The frightened young woman looking back bore little resemblance to the hopeful actress who had arrived in Los Angeles just months before. Her designer clothes and expensive jewelry couldn't disguise the haunted look in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. Her phone buzzed, Mark, messaging from a new number, begging her to run away with him. Before she could respond, another message arrived from Rajesh, dinner tonight. Wear the ruby collar. We have matters to discuss. Ashley deleted Mark's message, her fingers moving automatically as they had been trained to do. The web had been woven too tightly, its strands too strong to break. She was caught, and they both knew it. Descent into darkness began on New Year's Eve 2008. Ashley Parker had meticulously planned her escape over the holidays, carefully withdrawing small amounts of cash during her permitted shopping trips, collecting what documents she could access, and memorizing Mark's phone number after Rajesh had blocked it from her devices. The celebration at Rajesh's Bel Air mansion seemed like the perfect opportunity. With numerous guests present, his careful control would have to relax slightly. She never made it past the front gate. As she attempted to slip away during the countdown to midnight, Rajesh's security team intercepted her with quiet efficiency. She found herself in his wood-paneled study, watching him calmly dismiss his last party guests while holding her passport in his manicured hands. Did you really think I wouldn't know? Rajesh's voice remained eerily controlled as he produced a thick folder. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. Ashley with Mark at their secret meetings, text message transcripts, even recordings of their conversations. I've known since the beginning, Ashley. I wanted to see how far you would take this betrayal. The violence, when it came, was sudden and terrifying. The crystal tumbler he had been holding shattered against the wall inches from her head. You belong to me, he snarled, his cultivated accent slipping as his rage broke through. Everything you are, everything you have, it's all mine. January brought the financial reckoning. Ashley discovered every account in her name was overdrawn. Credit cards maxed out with charges she had never made. Loans she had no memory of signing appeared on her credit report. Rajesh had been building this trap for months, creating a web of debt that would make escape impossible. You owe me over $300,000, he informed her during a particularly chilling dinner at his home. I own your future, Ashley. But I'm willing to forgive the debt, if you prove your loyalty. Her parents' growing concern manifested in increasingly frequent calls. Her mother noticed how Ashley's once bubbly voice had become measured, careful. Honey, is everything okay? Sandra Parker asked during one monitored call. You sound different. Ashley couldn't tell them about the bruises hidden beneath her expensive clothes, or how Rajesh's security team followed her everywhere. Even more frightening were the times she spotted Rajesh himself watching her. She would catch glimpses of his black Bentley parked outside random buildings, see his reflection in store windows when she thought she was alone. His knowledge of her movements was uncanny. He could quote conversations she'd had in supposedly private moments. Ashley began fighting back the only way she could. She purchased a small voice recorder, hiding it in her jewelry box, the one place Rajesh's cameras couldn't surveil without revealing their existence. She documented his threats, his admissions of past violence, his promises of what would happen if she tried to leave again. Remember Catherine? He had asked one evening, casually mentioning one of the women from the storage unit documents. She thought she could leave too. No one has heard from her in years. The recorder captured it all, along with the sound of breaking glass and her own muffled cry of pain. February brought a new phase of control. Rajesh installed himself in her condo, claiming the guest room but really ensuring she couldn't make another escape attempt. Her wardrobe was replaced entirely with clothes he selected, modest, expensive pieces that covered the marks he left in his moments of rage. Her phone now operated only through his private network, every communication monitored and filtered. Mark tried to help, sending messages through mutual friends, attempting to contact her family. But Rajesh's influence proved too extensive. Mark's career opportunities mysteriously dried up, his reputation in the industry tarnished by whispered rumors. When he tried to approach Ashley outside an audition, Rajesh's security team ensured he landed in the hospital with accidental injuries. "He'll kill me if I stay," Ashley whispered into her hidden recorder one night, her voice trembling. "But he'll kill me if I try to leave." She had begun documenting everything, dates, times, witnesses to his behavior. She mailed copies of her recordings to a post office box rented under a false name, insurance against the worst happening. Her new escape plan was more subtle than the first. She feigned acceptance of her situation, playing the role of devoted companion so convincingly that even Rajesh began to relax his guard slightly. She attended therapy sessions with a counselor of his choosing, pretending to work through her trust issues while actually leaving paper trails of his abuse. March arrived with unseasonable storms, matching Ashley's increasingly dark state of mind. She had discovered more about Rajesh's past through careful investigation during her supervised internet time. Other women had tried to escape, some had even succeeded in running, though they remained in hiding. Others had simply vanished, their cases growing cold despite suspicious circumstances. The final straw came when she overheard Rajesh on the phone, discussing property in a remote area outside Los Angeles. "Completely private," he was saying. "No neighbors for miles. Perfect for what we discussed." The implications made her blood run cold. Ashley began preparing for what she knew would be her last chance at escape. She memorized security patrol patterns, documented camera blind spots, and carefully noted the times when Rajesh's attention was most diverted. She created a system of dead drops with Mark, who had recovered from his accident and remained determined to help despite the risks. Each night, she added to her documentation, speaking softly into her recorder while the shower ran to mask her voice. "If anything happens to me," she whispered, "it was Rajesh Kumar. Everything is in the storage unit." She included account numbers, property records, names of other victims, anything that might help build a case if she didn't survive. Her compliance act worked too well. Rajesh began talking about marriage, about making their arrangement permanent. He spoke of children, of a future together that made Ashley's skin crawl. But she smiled and nodded, playing her part while inside she screamed. The end of March brought a new level of urgency. Ashley discovered pregnancy tests and fertility supplements in Rajesh's briefcase. He was planning to trap her completely. Her parents' calls became more frantic as her responses grew more mechanical. Her father threatened to come to Los Angeles, only to find his credit cards suddenly maxed out, his bank accounts mysteriously frozen. April loomed like a deadline. Ashley knew she had to act soon. Rajesh was planning something big, something that would make escape impossible. She could see it in the satisfaction in his eyes when he watched her, in the way he had begun treating her as property already fully acquired rather than something still being purchased. Her last recorded message was clear and steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "My name is Ashley Parker. If you're hearing this, I'm probably dead. Everything I'm about to tell you is true." She detailed dates, places, names, a complete account of her time with Rajesh Kumar and what she had discovered about his past. What Ashley didn't know, as she finished her recording and carefully hid it with the others, was that her time was running out faster than she realized. Rajesh had already set his final plan in motion. The remote property was being prepared, and her fate had been sealed the moment she had first tried to escape. The descent was complete. All that remained was the fall. The discovery that sealed Ashley Parker's fate came through an innocent slip of paper, a bank statement accidentally left in Rajesh's jacket pocket during the first week of April 2009. As she stood in the pristine laundry room of her luxury prison, Her trembling hands revealed transaction records that pointed to something far darker than mere controlling behavior. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, shell companies with familiar names. She recognized some from the storage unit documents about his previous girlfriends. But there were new ones too, transactions that made no sense for a legitimate real estate business. The amounts were staggering, flowing through a complex network of companies and accounts. Ashley's acting skills faced their greatest test as she maintained her facade of docile compliance while secretly documenting everything she found. She began volunteering to organize Rajesh's home office when he was occupied with business calls, photographing documents with a tiny camera disguised as a button on her designer blouse. A final gift from Mark before Rajesh's threats had forced him into silence. Everything leads back to something called Project Lotus, she whispered into her recorder one night, hidden in her bathroom's steam shower to mask her voice. The same company name appears on papers from 2003, when Rebecca disappeared. And 2005, Zoe's accident. And now there are new transfers, bigger ones. The facade nearly cracked when she discovered a hidden safe in Rajesh's study, its contents revealing the true nature of his empire. Drug money laundering, human trafficking, blackmail, all concealed behind the veneer of legitimate real estate development. The women who had disappeared hadn't just been discarded lovers. They had been loose ends. But Rajesh Kumar hadn't built his criminal empire by being careless. He noticed the subtle changes in Ashley's behavior, how her hands lingered too long on his papers, how her eyes darted to his phone when it buzzed with certain messages. The predator in him recognized the shift in his prey's behavior. The trap was baited carefully. He began leaving out documents, each more incriminating than the last. He watched through his network of cameras as Ashley photographed them, her hands steady but her face betraying her tension. Each piece of evidence she gathered tightened the noose around her own neck. On April 15th, Ashley made her fatal mistake. Believing Rajesh to be in a business meeting, she attempted to contact an FBI agent whose card she had found in the storage unit documents. The call never went through. Every phone line in her gilded cage ran through Rajesh's private system. But the attempt was logged, flagged, and reported. Rajesh's response was masterful in its calculation. Instead of confrontation, he doubled down on affection. Expensive gifts appeared daily. He became the attentive, charming man who had first drawn her in. The surveillance seemed to relax, though Ashley knew better than to believe it had actually ceased. His planning something, she recorded in what would be one of her final messages. The way he watches me now, it's different. Like he's memorizing something he's about to lose. On April 20th, Ashley managed to send a coded message to her sister Emma through their shared Pinterest board. Something Rajesh's monitoring systems had dismissed as harmless. Remember Dad's lake house? The box under the dock? Check it. Soon. The box would contain copies of everything she had discovered. Insurance she prayed would eventually bring Rajesh to justice. The trap began closing on April 23rd. Rajesh announced a special dinner party to celebrate their relationship, inviting key members of his organization under the guise of a business celebration. Ashley recognized some names from the documents she had discovered, men and women whose elegant manners masked violent histories. If anything happens to me, she whispered into her recorder one last time, it started with Project Lotus. Everything you need is in storage unit 247. The key is taped under the third step of the fire escape at my old apartment building. Don't trust the police. Some of them are on his payroll. Find Emma. She knows what to do. The dinner invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock, hand-delivered to her bathroom, the one place she had thought was still private. The message was clear. There had never been any real privacy, any real escape. The date was set for April 25th, at his Bel Air mansion. As Ashley dressed for what she knew would be her final evening, she could see Rajesh's elaborate plan unfolding. The remote property she had discovered would be prepared. Her disappearance would be explained by a carefully crafted story, perhaps a lover's quarrel, a desperate flight, another young woman who couldn't handle the pressure of Los Angeles. She chose her outfit carefully, a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, the ones her mother had always said could never hide her true feelings. The ruby collar he had given her months ago waited in its velvet box, its clasp requiring his key to secure. Everything was arranged for a perfect evening, a celebration that would become a funeral. The last rays of the setting sun caught the diamonds on her wrist as she stepped into the car Rajesh had sent. The driver, not carless, she noted, but someone new with harder eyes, watched her in the rearview mirror as they wound their way up into the hills of Bel Air. Ashley Parker, aspiring actress from Milwaukee, had finally landed her biggest role, that of a woman knowingly driving to her own murder, maintaining her performance until the very end. She touched the recorder hidden in her bracelet, her final insurance policy, and practiced her smile in the darkening window. The trap was set, the players were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on the final act of a tragedy that had been years in the making. The evening of April 25, 2009, began like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of doom. Security cameras across Los Angeles captured Ashley Parker's final journey in fragmented clips, each frame moving her closer to her fate. At 6:45 p.m., footage showed her leaving her condo, the blue dress catching the dying sunlight. The unknown driver held the car door with practiced courtesy, his face carefully angled away from surveillance cameras. Traffic cameras tracked the black Mercedes as it wound through the city. 7:03 p.m., passing Sunset Boulevard. 7:12 p.m., turning onto Beverly Glen. 7:20 p.m., approaching the gates of Rajesh's Bel Air estate. Each timestamp would later become crucial evidence in piecing together Ashley's final hours. The security footage from Rajesh's mansion captured her arrival in high definition. Ashley emerged from the car at 7:22 p.m., her smile perfect but her hands clasped tightly together, a gesture her mother would later identify as a telltale sign of anxiety. Rajesh greeted her at the door, resplendent in a tailored black suit, his own smile practiced and predatory. The dinner party proceeded with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. 8 guests, all members of Rajesh's inner circle, seated around an immaculate dining table. The mansion's cameras recorded every moment. The wine being poured, the courses being served, the careful dance of conversation. At 8:45 p.m., Ashley excused herself to use the powder room. Security footage showed her making a final call attempt from a hallway phone, a call that never connected. The breaking point came at 9:17 p.m. A waiter, clearing plates, accidentally knocked over Ashley's purse. The contents spilled across the marble floor, including a small recording device she had concealed in a makeup compact. Rajesh's reaction was instant but controlled. The security footage showed him helping Ashley to her feet, his grip on her arm turning her knuckles white as he smiled at their guests. "Let's discuss this in my study." His words were picked up by the house's audio system. The cameras tracked them down the hallway, his hand still gripping her arm. The study door closed behind them at 9:22 p.m. What happened next was captured only in audio. "How long?" Rajesh's voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "How long have you been recording? What do you think you know?" Ashley's response was surprisingly steady. "I know about Project Lotus. About Rebecca, Zoe, Catherine. I know what happens to women who try to leave you." The argument escalated quickly. Glass shattered. A heavy thud. Ashley's voice, higher now with fear. "Everything's already documented. Emma has it all. You can't hide this anymore." The security footage showed dinner guests being hastily escorted out by staff between 9:30 and 9:45 p.m. None of them would later admit to hearing anything unusual. The last exterior camera showed the final guest's car leaving at 9:52 p.m. What happened in the study between 9:52 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. would be pieced together later from evidence and partial audio. The crystal decanter, later found with Ashley's blood and hair. The antique letter opener, missing from its usual place. The struggle that left scuff marks on the Persian rug. At 10:17 p.m., cameras captured Rajesh emerging from the study alone, his immaculate suit showing signs of disturbance. He made 3 phone calls over the next hour. Professional cleaners arrived at 11:30 p.m., their unmarked van backing up to the service entrance. By 2 a.m., April 26th, all physical traces of Ashley Parker had been meticulously removed from the Bel Air mansion. Security footage from that night would later show 3 vehicles leaving the property between 2:15 and 3 a.m., taking different routes into the Hollywood Hills. The initial missing person report wasn't filed until April 28th, when Ashley missed her weekly call with her parents. Sandra Parker's voice cracked as she told police about her daughter's increasingly strange behavior over the past months, about her growing fears and subtle hints of trouble. Mark Stevens, still bearing the scars of his accident, came forward with what information he could. But his credibility was quickly attacked. Anonymous tips to police painted him as a stalker, an obsessed fan who had harassed Ashley. His evidence was dismissed as the fabrications of a spurned admirer. Emma Parker received her sister's final message on April 29th. The lake house box contained enough evidence to launch an investigation, but by then, Rajesh's cleanup operation had been thorough. The storage unit was empty, its contents removed by police hours before real investigators arrived. The official investigation moved with frustrating slowness. Ashley's disappearance was initially treated as voluntary, a young actress running away from a failed relationship. Rajesh Kumar provided security footage showing Ashley leaving his home at 10:30 p.m., footage that experts would later prove had been digitally altered. But Sandra and Mark Parker refused to accept the official narrative. They recognized the ruby collar found in a dumpster 3 miles from Rajesh's mansion, its clasp broken, smeared with what testing would confirm was Ashley's blood. They noted how Rajesh had produced a typed letter in Ashley's name, supposedly explaining her departure, though Ashley had always handwritten her letters. May arrived with no sign of Ashley. Her credit cards remained unused, her phone silent. The condo in Beverly Hills was emptied, its contents placed in storage by Rajesh's efficient staff. Her clothes, shoes, jewelry, all carefully inventoried and stored, as if awaiting an owner who would never return. The last verifiable trace of Ashley Parker was a partial fingerprint on the study's window frame, 16 feet above ground level. It told a story of desperate struggle, of a final attempt to escape that ended in tragedy. But without a body, without concrete evidence of foul play, the case remained officially classified as a missing person investigation. Rajesh Kumar returned to his normal routine within weeks. His empire continued to function smoothly, his influence ensuring that uncomfortable questions were quietly dismissed. But in the gated communities and luxury high-rises of Los Angeles, whispers began to circulate about the true fate of Ashley Parker, whispers that would eventually lead to the unraveling of everything Rajesh had built. The security cameras that had so faithfully recorded Ashley's last evening continued their silent vigil. Somewhere in their digital memory, encrypted and hidden in offshore servers, lay the true record of what happened in that study. It would take years, more deaths, and the determined efforts of those who loved Ashley to finally bring that truth to light. But on that warm April night, as the last traces of Ashley Parker were being systematically erased, Los Angeles slept on, unaware that another young woman had joined the ranks of those who had dared to challenge Rajesh Kumar's control and paid the ultimate price. The discovery that shattered Rajesh Kumar's carefully constructed facade came on a rainy morning in October 2009. A maintenance worker at one of his remote properties in the Angeles National Forest stumbled upon human remains while repairing a broken drainage pipe. The location, investigators would later determine, had been chosen with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized all of Rajesh's operations. The body, though subjected to 6 months of natural decomposition, still wore the sapphire ring Emma Parker had given her sister for her 25th birthday. DNA testing would confirm what Ashley's family had feared since that April night. Their daughter, sister, and friend had met a violent end in the mansion on the hill. Detective Michael Lawson, who had never fully accepted the voluntary disappearance theory, reopened the case with renewed vigor. This time, armed with physical evidence and Ashley's hidden documentation, the investigation moved with unstoppable momentum. The recordings she had secreted away in her sister's lake house box proved invaluable, providing a timeline of escalating abuse and control. She documented everything, Lawson would later testify. Every threat, every manipulation, every piece of evidence she could gather. She knew she was likely going to die, and she made sure we'd have what we needed to prove it. Rajesh's empire began to crumble in early November when one of his longtime associates, facing his own criminal charges, decided to cooperate with authorities. The man's testimony opened a window into decades of criminal activity, money laundering, human trafficking, and a string of disappearances dating back to the early 2000s. On November 15th, As federal agents prepared to execute search warrants on his properties, Rajesh Kumar vanished. His private jet, tracked departing Van Nuys Airport, filed a flight plan for Vancouver but never arrived. Instead, surveillance footage would later show him boarding a cargo ship bound for Indonesia, a country lacking an extradition treaty with the United States. The international manhunt that followed captured global media attention. The story had everything: wealth, power, abuse, murder, and the devastating impact of ignored warning signs. Cable news networks ran special reports titled The Golden Cage, the Ashley Parker story, featuring interviews with her family, friends, and others who had witnessed but never reported Rajesh's controlling behavior. Sandra Parker appeared on national television, her voice breaking as she read from her daughter's final recordings. "Mom, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I should have listened to your concerns. But I need you to know that what happened to me wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except his." Mark Stevens, finally free to tell his story, shared details of Ashley's desperate attempts to escape, of the systematic way Rajesh had isolated and controlled her. His testimony, combined with Ashley's recordings, painted a chilling picture of modern-day imprisonment disguised as luxury. The investigation expanded internationally, focusing on Rajesh's global network of properties and businesses. Bank records revealed transfers to accounts in Dubai, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands, a complex web designed to hide both criminal proceeds and the darker aspects of his operations. In January 2010, Interpol located Rajesh in a luxury resort in Bali. Local authorities, pressured by international media attention, agreed to arrest him despite the lack of an extradition treaty. His attempt to bribe his way to freedom failed when junior officers, disgusted by the details of Ashley's murder, refused to cooperate. The trial began in Los Angeles in March 2011, drawing daily crowds and media coverage. The prosecution presented a methodically built case, using Ashley's own words through her recordings to tell the story of her final months. Security footage, recovered from encrypted servers, showed the truth of that fatal night, the argument, the struggle, the calculated cleanup operation that followed. Rajesh's children testified for the prosecution, revealing years of witnessing their father's controlling behavior toward various women. His daughter's testimony about warning Ashley proved particularly damaging. "I tried to tell her she wasn't the first, but I never imagined she would be the last." The impact on both families was profound. The Parkers, once a close-knit Midwestern family, struggled with guilt and grief. Sandra Parker became an advocate for domestic violence awareness, focusing particularly on financial abuse and coercive control. Mark Parker, Ashley's father, retired early from his banking job, unable to face daily reminders of the financial traps Rajesh had used to control his daughter. Rajesh's family faced their own reckoning. His ex-wife revealed decades of controlling behavior she had endured before finally escaping. His children, now adults, grappled with their complicity in their father's crimes. The warnings not given, the signs ignored, the victims they had watched cycle through their father's life. The verdict, when it came in July 2011, was swift and decisive. Rajesh Kumar was found guilty of first-degree murder, along with multiple counts of financial fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. The judge, citing the calculated nature of his crimes and his long history of abuse, sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But the true legacy of Ashley Parker's case lay in the changes it sparked. California passed Ashley's Law in 2012, expanding the definition of domestic violence to include financial control and surveillance. The FBI established a specialized unit focusing on cases involving wealthy perpetrators using financial means to control victims. The warning signs that had been ignored, the isolation, the surveillance, the financial control, became part of standard domestic violence training for law enforcement. Ashley's recordings were used to educate police officers, social workers, and domestic violence advocates about the subtle signs of coercive control. 5 years after Ashley's death, Sandra Parker stood in front of a group of law enforcement officers at a training seminar. She played one of her daughter's final recordings. "The scariest part isn't the violence," Ashley's voice echoed through the room. "It's how normal everything looks from the outside. The expensive gifts, the beautiful house, the perfect smile. It's all part of the trap. The Ashley Parker case became a watershed moment in how society views domestic violence among the wealthy. Her story highlighted how money and social status can mask abuse, how perpetrators can use financial means to create prisons without walls. Rajesh Kumar remains in maximum security prison, his empire dismantled, his wealth confiscated and distributed to his victims' families. The Bel Air mansion where Ashley spent her final hours was sold, the proceeds going to a foundation established in her name to help women escape financially controlling relationships. And in Milwaukee, in the Parker family home, Ashley's bedroom remains unchanged. On her dresser sits a small voice recorder, the tool she used to ensure that even in death, her voice would be heard, her story would be told, and other women might recognize the golden cage before the door closes behind them.